Welcome back to the Sin Bin podcast. I'm Dylan Skeen, joined here by Michael Eganhouse, and we are so excited for you guys to join us for our second episode. Today we are going to be covering the Bison as usual and their recent 3-game stretch against the Atlanta Gladiators and some future important games coming up. We also have the Blackhawks later again, up and down past week this last week. The recent flurry of trades around the NHL, because there has been a lot as of late as the trade deadline nears in just about a month. Our weekly prospect roundup will finish us off today, and a little bit more in between, so be sure to keep listening as we're going to jump right into it. Mike, what did you think of the last 3 Bison games against the Atlanta Gladiators?
Well, I think anytime you win 2 out of 3, you got to be happy with it, and especially Friday night, 5-0 shutout, first
big
one ever with a hat trick.
Oh yeah,
with Patrick Bajkov. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I think anytime you take 2 out of 3, it's a good thing, and especially like you said, big games coming up, fighting for that, holding on to that last playoff spot. I think it's really important and a really good weekend trip for the Bison in Atlanta.
Absolutely, I think. As we're beginning to near down the stretch, we're not there yet, and we talked about it a little bit in the last episode, but we're not down the stretch yet. It only just became February, but also it's not getting any earlier. It's everything keeps moving, and before you know it, by the end of February, you only have March and a couple games in April, and by then, playoff seeding is already kind of set. So February, I think, in particular, is going to be a huge month for the Bison, but again, as Mike said, we'll get into that a little bit later. We'll talk about that first game you brought up, the 5-0 win and the Patrick Bajkov hatty. What a trade. What a trade that's been for the Bison so far. Let me just look up Patrick Bajkov's stats here really quick. Already with the Bison, 8 points, 6 goals in 11 games. That's more points than he had with the Cyclones and Rapid City Rush in 28 games combined. He only had 5 assists and 1 goal in those 28 games with those 2 teams this year. And yes, those 2 teams are a little bit worse than the Bison this year, but that's definitely a big of note that the Bison are already in that not bottom barrel of teams for being an expansion franchise. That's relatively impressive, and you should give them props for that already. But as any hockey team should be, they're not satisfied yet until they make a playoff spot, and that's what I think they should be. But games like that 5-0 win are going to be huge for doing that. Again, that's the 3rd shutout in Bison history, 2nd for Yaniv Perets, and then again, a Patrick Bajkov hatty there. He's just been fantastic since coming over to the Bison. Anything else you want to say about Patrick Bajkov? Because, I mean, we can talk about Zach Hoffman. We talked about him a little bit in the first episode, but I think we've already got him covered. A good, solid top 4 defenseman. Not much else there right now. I mean, unless he has a standout performance, but there's not much else to say. He's just a good top 4 defenseman right now. Patrick Bajkov, I mean, he's been a little bit streaky, but, you know, any good scorer, look at someone like Alex DeBrincat in the NHL. He's pretty streaky, and he's still a good goal scorer. I think Bajkov has been exactly what the Bison would have hoped for with that trade. And again, he's already outpaced what he's done in the earlier year. Again, 8 points, which is 2 more than what he had in 28 games. So that's almost 3 times the amount of games with the other teams that he's already beaten that point total. So he clearly meshes well with specifically the coach, I think. He's just had a really good relationship with him. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think you're exactly right, and I think from Bajkov's point of view, I mean, if you get traded to a new team, and you want to make sure that you make sure that the coach is right in his decision to trade for you, and I mean, with a performance like that, you know, head coach Philip Barsky's got to be pumping his fists in the air, going, "Yes, I made the right move."
I told you so.
And so I think from Bajkov's personal standpoint, I think he's got to be very happy with himself.
Oh, absolutely.
Cementing his place into the Bison lineup, because you never want to get traded and then come to the team and let your coach down, because not only is Philip Barsky the head coach, but he also is the general manager for the Bison. So he's making these decisions, and he doesn't want to be wrong. And if you make your coach look like a fool, that's not going to be a good look on you.
Exactly. Well, I know head coach Philip Barsky had said prior to obtaining him that he had coached him in the past, and he thought he could get more out of Bajkov than what was currently being gotten out of him, and clearly he was right. So we love that Patrick Bajkov is already doing better with the Bison, a top 6 mainstay there, and we love to see that. Moving on from that first big win, and then our second game, that was a loss. Did you watch most of that game? Because I caught a good amount of that second game as well.
I did, and if you want my honest opinion, I really think that we could have swept the 3-game series. I thought that second game we played really well and we fought to the end, but we just could not figure out the goaltender. And I think that that's something that obviously the Gladiators ran into. I mean, they couldn't figure out Yaniv Perets the whole weekend and Brian Wilson. But sometimes you just run into those hot streaks of a goaltender. And but I really liked the fight that the Bison showed in that game. I think it easily could have went our way if we could have found a couple more bounces. But puck always doesn't go your way.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm going to have a little bit of a different opinion personally. I watched a lot of that game, and I do think that the Bison definitely fought hard in that game, but it definitely seemed like that game there was a lot of miscues. There was a lot of missed passes. There was a lot of one-and-dones in the zone. Like, you'd enter the zone, you'd try to get set up, and then it would just get cleared. And I was going to say, if they would have lost that second game and continued to look like that, I would have said, someone like maybe Philip Barsky needs to run some more drills or practice before, making sure everyone's on the same page, something like that. But clearly they had that tightened up, because even though they did have a little bit more miscommunication in that second game, they got a lot better in that third game. Again, a 3-1 victory this time. So a 5-0 win, and then 2 3-1 games, just one going to each side. And that second game, Sam Cota put up 2 goals, and again, he had just recently gotten his first professional goal, and now he has 2 more. So it seems like he might be heating up a little bit. What have you looked much into Sam Cota on the team so far?
I have not done extensive research on him, but just from, if you were to turn on that game and realize that, with the performance he had, he scored the 2 of the 3, but he also just played solidly overall besides the scoring. And I think, kind of going back to the Bajkov thing, knowing that you have those type of players, Bajkov was from a trade, but just knowing that you have those type of players that the coach can trust, and getting that production from Sam Cota was really huge, along with the goalie performances. Nothing to take away from Sam Cota. 2 out of the 3 goals is great. But it does help when you have fantastic goaltending, and I think that was, if you want my big takeaway from the 3-game series, it really was the goaltending for the Bison. But I think when you're getting that offensive production in addition to the goaltending, you just look like an all-star team.
That's the biggest thing I've seen with the Bison, is their depth. Looking at their goaltending, you have Yaniv Perets, you have Mark Sinclair, who was the all-star for the Bison this year, and you have Brian Wilson, who is very suitable, and he's probably goalie number 3, and that's also not counting any goaltenders that may get sent down from the AHL. So you have some pretty good options in net. We already talked about last podcast their depth on D, when you have someone like Zach Hoffman on the middle pair there. You have Jake Murray and Bryce Montgomery on the top pair, and then Zach Hoffman, and kind of depends on who you want to have on that second pair there. There might be Ryan Seedham, who I thought personally, even in that loss in the second game, I was watching Ryan Seedham's game, and he looked really good even in that game. And he's at this point basically a bottom pair defenseman. You have Case McCarthy, who gets called up and sent down kind of a lot between Hartford and the Bison, which, by the way, I do want to give a fun little anecdote about Case McCarthy real quick. So I was looking at some of his stats, and I did not realize that he actually played for Boston University for the past 5 years before this one. Yeah.
Really?
For the past 5 years. So he has been playing for Boston since 2019. The 2019-20 season, he has been playing for Boston U. And that means that he has come in contact with some really good players. He was with Lane Hudson for the past couple of years at Boston U. He played with Macklin Celebrini, if you might know that name, if you're even kind of attached to the NHL. He played with Macklin Celebrini last year. And another guy I'm going to talk about a little bit later in our prospect roundup, but Ryan Green, a Blackhawks prospect who's doing fantastic as one of the co-captains right now of Boston U. He's played with all of them. So that's just a pretty fun fact I kind of noticed. I was like, I had no idea Case McCarthy played for Boston U, but fun little anecdote there. So when Case McCarthy comes down, he's played with some pretty darn good competition there. But back to just the Bison roster. Again, their defense just so deep. Again, that top, the M&M's pairing them.
Famous M&M's
pairing.
pairing.
The M&M's pairing, the Carter Berger, that's the name that was escaping me, on that second pair, who, again, leads all the defensemen in points. So you have the M&M's pairing on the top. You have Berger and Hoffman on the second pair. And then you have Ryan Seedham and someone like, defenseman Thomas Stewart is who I was thinking of, excuse me. Thomas Stewart, and then when Case McCarthy comes down, your bottom pair is Case McCarthy, Ryan Seedham. That's your bottom pair. Like, this depth in goaltending, depth in defensemen, of really good defensemen, and then forwards, as we've seen, we're now getting performances out of a lot of guys. Gavin Gould can play on that top line and has with Matsushima and Lieb when he was still there. You have Budgel on the second line. You have someone like Blake McLaughlin, who's called up and sent down a little bit. You have Lockhart, who's a fantastic middle-of-the-lineup player. You have Josh Boyer, who's a pretty darn good third-line center. You now have Bajkov. You now have Coda putting up good performances. He now has 4 points in 8 games, so he's starting to put up a good amount of stats as well. So you have a lot of guys on this team that can play and play well. So I definitely think that we talked about it last time, that this isn't a top-line team, that this is a depth team. But when you look at the players and you look at performances, it just kind of reinforces that idea that this isn't a team that's going to look at their top pair, or, again, even like I said last time, like a Colorado Avalanche, where you look at your Cale Makars and Nathan McKinnon's. It's just not that kind of built team. And I think that building this kind of team with a depth in mind is really smart for a team where you get players called up constantly. In a league where you get players taken away constantly, having depth as your main focus in all areas of both offense, or I should say forwards, defensemen, and goalies, having that depth is incredibly important. And so I think that's definitely the right way to go. And I think head coach and general manager Philip Barsky has done a very good job at getting that depth in all of those 3 positions. So giving him a shout out there. Anything else you have on the Bison on their last couple games, or else I'll get into their future games?
Well, I just want to comment on what you said with the depth, because I think you bring up a really, really good point in the ECHL and really any kind of minor league team like that, because if you look at the NHL and how they build teams in the NHL, they still have depth, because you always need depth because of injuries or whatnot. But I think one thing that is key that you brought up is the NHL doesn't face as much difficulty of bringing up and down players. I mean, sure, they send them down to the AHL.
But that's only if they're not doing enough, or they have too many players on their roster.
Exactly.
That's not an issue. So you don't have to deal with your best player might be gone for the next game. Like, you're not going to have that issue in the NHL unless there's an injury. In the ECHL, it's a possibility. I mean, I don't think... And most times you have to be signed to like an AHL contract to get called up and stuff like that. So I don't see someone like Eddie Matsushima getting called up. But if he continues to play amazingly, who knows? Maybe he gets offered an AHL contract with Hartford because they think he can do really well in a bottom 6 role. By the way, Hartford, not that I want Matsushima to go, but like if I was the general manager of the AHL, I would definitely be looking at Eddie for a bottom 6 role because he plays that really well. But I'm going to pretend like I didn't say that so that Eddie can continue to stay with the Bison because I like him where he is right now. But exactly, it's just a different league and you have to have different priorities. So in a league where you're like, can build around just those top couple players, of course, you build around top players and you have depth players that are more complementary pieces. But when you have a league where you can't do that, then I think it's very smart to just have those extra pieces and focus more on depth than high-end scoring through certain ideas. So I want to say that the Bison have definitely built that correctly. Speaking of getting those depth players, I want to talk about their recent addition, Austin Heidemann, traded for future considerations with the Wichita Thunder, had 12 points in 31 games with the Wichita Thunder, and he is relatively young. Heidemann, he's only 25. He's from Maple Grove, Minnesota. And yeah, he played at Mercyhurst College for 2 years and then went to RPI for 2 years. Solid stats in both of those leagues, and then has been in the ECHL for 2 years. He was with the Worcester Railers in his first year and had 1 goal in 7 games. Got traded from the Railers to the Thunder, and then from the Thunder to the Bison. So sounds kind of familiar of a different trade that happened recently. Not that I necessarily think Heidemann's going to be as good of a trade as the Bajkov-Hoffman trade was, but I mean, there's definitely some value there. If you think someone who scored 7 goals in 30 games, again, is someone looking at depth, I think he's a really good depth piece. I mean, he's a center, so it's probably going to be hard to slot him in necessarily when you have such good center depth, when you have Eddie Matsushima as your first-line center, you have Josh Boyer as your third-line center, and it's escaping me right now who their second-line center is. I should really know that, honestly, at this point, but oh well. Their second-line center, Brett Budgell. I was just talking about him, one of the best point-per-game, or close to point-per-game producers on the team. So, yeah, when you have Matsushima, Budgell, and Boyer, you don't need, center is not a need, but again, call-ups happen. Budgell has been called up in the past, so if Boyer needs to take on the second-line role, I think Heidemann would do fantastic in a third-line role. And right now, he's probably just going to be that fourth-line center. But again, you just have a lot of people on this team that can produce and produce solidly well. Maxim Barbashev is another one I didn't mention earlier, but he's an NHL prospect. So, drafted by the Rangers in the 5th round. So, he's an NHL level prospect. Even though he isn't producing at a very high level right now, only 5 points in 20 games, you still notice him on the ice. He's big, he hits hard. And that's why I love this trade. Again, you're trading just future considerations, so you'll just basically an IOU. And you get someone who can help further fill out your roster in case more people get called up. And I do really like that approach from them, especially when you have, like, imagine if this team could get Danny Kadek back, and Blake McLaughlin, or even getting a Chongmin Lee back from the Korean team. Like, you get those 3 guys back, your depth on forward is off the charts, and I already talked about how good your depth in defenseman and goalie is. So I definitely think these trades have been pretty darn good for the Bison. We'll have to see how Heidemann does, though. He played in only 1 game this past weekend. No points registered in that game, and obviously points are not everything in a game, but it is a somewhat okay measuring stick for certain players. But that's about it for the trade. Any last notes before we get into those upcoming games?
Well, I think you're hitting it on the head, and we probably sound like a broken record, but Barsky is going for that depth because I think he understands the importance of, we talked about it last week on the podcast, of finding players that are not going to whine about not getting playing time or fitting where, like, they will go where they're told and they will do their job. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing with these trades with the depth is these players are coming in. They know that they're, the foundation of the Bison is set, but just like Heidemann, he's going to come in here and hopefully he's going to fill his role as that, bottom 6, 4th line guy. And, hopefully it's going to work out. I guess We'll see.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see. This team has no passengers on this team. Make sure there is good depth from the top to the bottom of the lineup. But I'll finally get into the upcoming schedule because that's going to be big for the Bison. I want to talk about specifically. So tomorrow, they have a game tomorrow against the Jacksonville Icemen. And when it comes to important games, I'd say it's on the lower end. Just talking about it just because it's Jacksonville, it's out of division, it's something like that. It's still an important game, but out of the important games, the next coming three, so the three that we'll have before the next episode of the podcast, against the Jacksonville Icemen, and then 2 games against the Savannah Ghost Pirates, all of 3 of those games are away on their pretty long road trip right now at the end of January, beginning of February. But those games are important, but the real important games I want to talk about start on Valentine's Day. So Valentine's Day this year, Friday the 14th, they have an away game against Kalamazoo. And you look at the standings right now, and there are 3 teams below you. Again, there's 7 teams in your division, and you need to be in the top 4 to make the playoffs. So the teams you really need to worry about are those 3 that are below you, and then I would say probably the one right above you, mainly because the one right above you is the Heartlanders, and that's a rival, and they may have 10 points on you in the standings, but they've played 2 more games, so overcoming them, especially if you have some big wins in head-to-head matchups, you could absolutely overtake the Heartlanders before the end of the year. So the big games are going to be those ones against the Heartlanders, the Fuel, and then the games you need to win are, again, those 2 and the Cyclones and the Wings. Because if they're at the bottom of the division, you cannot be losing games.
No.
Especially at this point in the year, in February, you can't be losing games against Kalamazoo. That's what they did somewhat recently. Their last game before this 3-game stand against Atlanta, they played against the Wings, and the day before that, they played against the Cyclones. They beat the Cyclones 3-0, but they lost 6-3 against the Wings. And that's one that you're going to want to have back come the end of the season, because especially those bottom of the division games are incredibly important. So that game on Valentine's Day, huge, away against the Wings. And then that Saturday, the day after, is a home game against the Cyclones. That one, another must win, because they're at the bottom of the standings. That Sunday, another home game, that one against the Toledo Walleye. Another important game, but I wouldn't say as important as those top 2, purely because that's a top team. If you lose against a top team, it happens. Even if it's in division, like, obviously you would really prefer to have a win there, and especially against a team that you could be playing in the playoffs, you want to prove you can beat that team, but they've already kind of proven they can play with the Walleye. I think that they could scare them off at their home barn, but if they lose, it's not the end of the world. The biggest games, even more than those we've just talked about, come that next week, the February 19th against the Iowa Heartlanders. That one is going to be huge. It's away, so if you can steal a win at their home barn, you could, in theory, overtake them, depending on how the Heartlanders do in their next couple games. And then it's the big weekend, because we have a makeup game from the Indy Fuel that was canceled due to the ice cracking earlier this year, which means that we now have 4 games against the Indy Fuel in a row. We have Friday the 21st against the Fuel, Saturday the 22nd against the Fuel, and Sunday the 23rd against the Fuel, all at home. And then Tuesday you have an away game against the Fuel.
Worst comes to worst, you have to at least go 500.
If you want to make the playoffs this year,
you gotta.
I think you have to win
all of them.
I think you have to win at least 3. I think if you lose 1, especially if it's the away game, it's okay. You can live with it because you still have the 3-1 advantage. And if you split, I mean, it's possible if the Heartlanders are starting to do worse.
You might have to steal the Walleye game, but
exactly. But those Fuel games are the most important, and especially 4 in a row against the team you are closest to in the standings fighting for that 4th spot. Those are going to be the biggest games. And I think those games, beyond just the importance that they have right now, but I think during those games, the Bison are going to start really having that rivalry with the Fuel. Because honestly, as much as I love the Heartlanders one, we didn't talk about that a ton in the first episode, but the way that the Bison have started their rivalry against the Heartlanders was honestly just amazing to see. I mean, they had played like 4 games pretty close to each other in the beginning of the year, and I was already seeing one of their the Heartlander players, Nico. I'm not sure of his full name. I'll look up the Heartlanders roster, but I already was seeing people in the Bison stands wearing Nico sucks. And like, this is the first year of their existence, and they played like 4 games, and people are already making specialty t-shirts to complain about players on the other team. That is hilarious, and I just love, that's what it is. Nico Blockman, 6'2", number 77 on the Iowa Heartlanders. People already, he's a goon. Like, he's a little bit of a goon, and I mean, you need certain players to fill certain roles on your roster, but Bison players and fans have already had a disliking for him specifically, but the rivalry that started between those two has been so fun to watch, honestly.
I'll never forget, I went to a therapy session, and my therapist had went to one of those Bison Heartlander games, and we were talking about it because I hadn't been able to go to a game yet, and he was like, dude, you have got to go see a Bison Heartlanders game, because there's this guy in the Heartlanders, and we hate him.
Yup.
He's just a goon. He gets in everyone's face. And I was like,
that's number 77.
Yep. Yep, that's him. And I'll be going to a game soon.
Yep, that's Nico Blockman for you. Yeah, and, number 1 hated man in Bloomington, I guess. But I mean, I guess he's doing his job well there, so you can't really fault him for it. Give him some credit, even if you don't want to, because we're Bison fans. But yeah, no, the Heartlanders games and the Fuel games specifically, from the 19th till that 25th game, are going to be the most important, I would say, for this upcoming schedule. And again, standings right now, the Indy Fuel have 2 games in hand against you and are only 2 points back in the standings. So they're very close. They're right on your heels for that 4th spot. And the Bison to the Heartlanders is about a 10-point gap. So a little bit further there. The Heartlanders have struggled more recently compared to the Bison, where they have been 4-3-1-2, or I could say 4-3-3 for the Heartlanders. Meanwhile, the Bison have been 7-3 in their last 10. So as of late, the Bison have been better. But if you remember that really rough, I think it was November, that the Bison had, kind of really put them back in the standings, and is why they're having to fight back now. But that 4th spot is pretty solid for the Bison if you can win those games. If you can win those games against the Fuel, the Wings, and the Cyclones,
good shot.
You've really extended your lead, and you could even be in the 3rd spot. Because when we're talking about future playoffs, it's going to be the 1 seed against the 4 seed, and it's going to be the 2 seed against the 3 seed in our division. And let's be real here, the Walleye are going to be the 1 seed. Like, I would be shocked.
They'd have to have a major fall off.
Exactly. Like, they have been solid. Like, they've been only okay in their past 10, going 5-3-2, compared to the Fort Wayne, who's in 2nd right now, going 7-3 in their past 10. But they're still 11 points above the Comets, even though they've played 3 more games. I still see the Walleye being that top team at the end of the year, unless they really start taking some bad losses.
Maybe that will start with the Bison.
Maybe. Who knows? But especially if you can beat the Heartlanders and you can get that 2nd spot. I know they play Fort Wayne twice at the end of March, and then their last 2 games of the regular season are against Fort Wayne. So if you manage to get above the Heartlanders in the standings, and the standings go Walleye, Comets, Bison, Heartlanders, or whatever's in that 4 seed, you're playing the Comets 2 games before the playoffs, who you might be playing in the playoffs. And I think that's definitely, it's something I selfishly want to see, because that would make those last couple games incredibly interesting, and then also would be a good preview. But that's only if the Bison can get these important wins in February in the first place.
Well, and you said it'd be nice to get kind of a preview of the last 2 games, and then you're like,
we know what this playoff team is like.
We know how they're going to look. Let's go play them in the playoffs where it really counts.
Exactly. Now, I will say those last 2 games are away in Fort Wayne. So they might have the same idea. They might have, we're the higher team in the standings, we're at home, if we get 2 wins in a row at the end of the season, that's pretty demoralizing for a team that's about to face you in the playoffs. So it could go either way. So depending on where the Bison are in the standings, those last 2 games could be huge for playoff implications. But again, that is a couple months away. Right now, those most important games you want to be focusing on in February is those Indy Fuel games, and then those games against those lower tier opponents in Cincinnati, Kalamazoo, and then even the Heartlanders game on the 19th. You have a lot of in-division games during this February, end of February, and those games you got to win. I mean, you got to win those games if you want to make the playoffs well.
So what I'm hearing, Dylan, is if you don't have your tickets to those games, those home games coming up, any home games, get them.
Get them.
Come to the Grossinger Motors Arena.
Not sponsored, I promise.
Because it's getting down to the wire, and we need some fans at the arena to help these boys out.
Yeah, we've had some solid attendance at the games,
really
especially as of more recently. We're still technically lower when it comes to comparatively of like the full league, but for a first-year team, stuff like that, like they're really well. Like, I don't want to trash talk the Heartlanders. I totally do want to trash talk the Heartlanders, but I want to pretend like I'm not. But the Heartlanders are the ones that are really struggling in attendance when it comes to teams. Like, we're like a little bit lower on the end, but the Heartlanders, if you're talking about a team that's struggling in attendance, that's the Heartlanders, which should make it easier for away games. Bison, all right, maybe some Bison fans travel up to Iowa, go see an away game. I don't know. That might be too far. My point is, these upcoming games are going to be huge for the Bison, and we talked about how improved their depth is. If they can get, I hope, in between then that the Wolfpack send down somebody like Blake McLaughlin or someone like Chase McCarthy or someone just to improve that team even more, because if you have the depth you currently have and then you get those big additions, someone like Chase McCarthy, who's a 5-year vet of the NCAA, like those would be big additions to have at the end of the year. And I truly hope that maybe the Wolfpack make a trade or two near the deadline and they get some extra players and they can send some players back down to the Bison. Please. Pretty please. Wolfpack GM, please. But that's enough for me. Any last minute topics you have on the Bison as we wrap up our Bison segment today? We went a little bit long on our Bison segment today, so we're going to wrap it up here. Any other last things you want to add?
I just think we've, pretty much said what they need to do. Now it's just up to them to actually do it.
Yeah.
And like I said, if you haven't gotten tickets to any of the home games, I really, really hope that you do.
Especially if you're in the area.
It's a really good experience, whether you're from Bloomington Normal or the surrounding areas. Get your tickets, come out and try to experience a game, because not only do they need your support, but it's a really fun time.
Exactly, especially if you're a college student. I know a lot of college students have been turned off by the price tag on it, because most tickets, especially if you're going at will call, like right as the game starts, it's probably $25 for a ticket. And I know if I said $25 tickets to most college students, they say, okay, but I could just go to pub and get blasted for that amount of money. And I would say that's a completely reasonable take. However, you could also go to a Bison 309 night against the Heartlanders,
yep,
and then you get to scream at people while you're drinking only $3 beers. So,
tip for you that may not know or kind of new to the Bison, but if you call their box office number, check out their Facebook page also. Bison fan heard. Wow, I can't speak. The Bloomington Bison Herd fan page. They post the boxed number on every post, but if you call them, you will bypass the Ticketmaster fees, which makes it a little bit cheaper. So that is the way to go to get your tickets. But yeah, come to the games, help them out, and hopefully they'll make a good playoff push.
Yeah, no, especially, again, if you're looking for good games, as we just said, end of February is going to have some real important games, especially 3 home games in a row against the Indy Fuel, which I'm going to be honest, I talked about it a little bit. I don't even know how the Indy Fuel aren't like a major rival already. I mean, they're owned by the same owner, and there's a lot of vying interest because they're the ECHL team that's connected to the Hawks. So I'm sure there are some people even in this area who have allegiance to the Fuel just because of the Hawks. So I'm surprised that team isn't more of a rival already, but I think
it'll come.
I think with 4 games in a row against one team, you're gonna start to see more of those chippy plays and more of that rivalry forming. But that will be the last of our Bison talk today. We're gonna move into our Hawks games. We had 3 games since we last talked on the pod. One of them we were watching while the pod was going on, but it didn't end yet. So that 4-1 win at Tampa, we didn't get to talk about that yet since it was still going on. We then had a 3-2 loss against the Carolina Hurricanes, and then a 5-1 loss at Florida. So I'll start with that 4-1 win at Tampa. Any major things you want to bring up on that win?
Well, Holy Landon Slaggert, because my goodness, not only did he show up in that game, he scored the only goal against Florida, mind you, 7 seconds into the game, fastest goal in franchise history. But like we talked about in the last episode, just have patience because these boys are coming up to the Hawks and they're coming up fast, and Landon Slaggert is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, no, Landon Slaggert was someone that I was... I don't know if I was super high on Slaggert coming out of Notre Dame. I knew he scored pretty well, but he seemed like someone who was more of a Cole Gutman, who we talked about, someone who's like an AHL All-Star, and could dominate that league. But I don't know if they were someone that was going to do incredibly well at the NHL level. And I am very proud to say that watching him this year in both the AHL and NHL, I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong about Landon Slaggert. Because I don't think he's necessarily an AHL All-Star, but I think he's someone who his play does translate to the NHL. And he's more of a... We just talked about it with the Bison. Someone like Gavin Gould, who can play anywhere in your lineup. I wouldn't mind seeing Gould on the top line with Lee and Matsushima. Or I wouldn't mind him seeing on the third line with someone like Boyer. Like, he's someone who can play up and down the lineup. Slaggert is the exact same way. A lot of people have been comparing Slaggert to Brandon Hagel. And I do understand. I do not think he has the same ceiling as Hagel does. I don't think he's going to be what he's currently is on the Lightning. Like, right now, he's almost a point per game on the Lightning. And Hags was one of my favorite player when he was...
I miss him so much.
I do. But I still think the trade was good for the Hawks in their future. But, yeah, I miss Hags a little bit too. But I think Slags now, it can I mean, he can even take the same nickname that Hags had. Like, it's too perfect. He can play up and down the lineup. If you could put him with Bedard and have him being that forechecking presence that you need on that top line to get the pucks to someone like Bedard or Nazar. Though I think Tyler Bertuzzi's doing that role pretty well on the top line right now. He can play on your third line as that checking guy. He can play on your fourth. I think he can play on any line depending on what you need. So I definitely think Slaggert's going to be someone that's going to be a important piece to the Hawks moving forward. I mean, you saw his impact on that Tampa game. He didn't have a ton in that Tampa game. He didn't really score or anything like that, but he was... Or no, that's a lie. He did score in that Tampa game. He had the goal from Lucas Reichel. Pause. I was wrong. He did score in that Tampa game, and then he scored again in the Florida game 2 games later. And again, that was what you saw in the NCAA with him. His shot is really good. Like, yes. He has a really good shot, and then he plays the game like a grinder. Like, he gets in the dirty areas. He's first on the puck. He's always going. And I definitely think he's going to be someone that's maybe not a top 6 piece for the Hawks in their future, but you can already see the impact he has at about 23. And he's just doing fantastic. Another fun little tidbit about Slaggert. I have talked to a lot of people that play in like the ACHA around here or in Iowa and stuff like that, and I've met a lot of people. I know a good amount of people that played with him in juniors, or
really?
not in like juniors, but in the USA, like different like development programs and different stuff. Like, he was on Mission growing up, and okay. I know a few other people who played for Mission, and they were like, yeah, no, I know him. His dad coached me. He's a cool guy. I played with Landon Slaggert. So I remember talking to a couple of those guys around the Hawks, and they were like, yeah, no, we know Slaggert. He's good in the community. I know even because I went to his first NHL game. That was ironically enough, played for the Fighting Irish, and his first NHL game was St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, wow.
But I remember just seeing a bunch of family there at that game that he was talking to afterwards, and so he definitely has a connection to this city, and I think he's happy to be here. So I'm excited to see Slaggert more. Talking a little bit more about especially those last two losses at Florida and the Canes. We did see Bedard heating up a little bit. He had that gross goal at Tampa. I don't know. If you haven't seen that goal yet, look up the Bedard goal against Tampa Bay. It was like a third. Like there was maybe like room enough to maybe get 3 pucks in that sized hole. He shot at top corner while the goalie was pinching up against the top corner. If you tried to put a loaf of bread in that, you wouldn't be able to fit it in.
And if we could shoot like that, Dylan, I don't think we'd be doing that this podcast
yeah,
right now.
I think we'd be playing professional hockey right now if we could make that shot. So that shot was absolutely ridiculous by Bedard. It seems that he's heating up a little bit. Didn't have any points in that Florida game, but nobody did other than Slaggert. He did have a goal against the Canes during that loss as well. So especially under Sorensen, I think Bedard has been heating up a good amount.
I think that was such an underrated move.
I do too.
I think that people, I mean, obviously the Hawks were terrible. They're still terrible.
Yeah.
But when you're able to take Connor Bedard, your franchise guy, and up his production from a coaching change, I don't think that people can complain about that. Yeah. I'm not saying that everybody was complaining about that move, but I think looking at just his production, I think you have to say, okay, that was a much needed move because this is Bedard's second year. Like, we need him to kind of get going and show growth, which he has.
He has. I agree.
But I think knowing that he stepped up his game even more, it's good to see that because we need Bedard to grow. Because if Bedard stops growing and we stunt his growth, then what have we done this rebuild for?
The future is going to be a lot harder if you do that. But I don't think that's it. I mean, again, people are a lot of people. I don't know if you saw this past week, but during the Florida game, Mark Messier was really harping on Bedard.
I did see that. Oh my god!
And there's like people on Twitter, or I don't care. I'm not calling it X. A lot of people on Twitter who still were like someone like Brent Sopel, a former Hawk, who was trashing Bedard's 200-foot game. I'm like,
that was when he was talking about how he was saying that they should sit Bedard.
Messier said that he shouldn't have been allowed on the power play. I'm like, I'm sorry, but if you're a coach and you don't put Connor Bedard out on the power play, you are only hurting your team. I get you want to make a statement to Bedard, but thinking about it from a reasonable perspective, you sit Bedard on the power play, that's only going to hurt. He's your best offensive piece, whether you like it or not. So would I want to instill in Bedard to have more of a 200-foot game and to try a little bit harder on back checks? Yes, but not every player is going to be that. And think about what we talked about last week with the prospects. A lot of our prospects are that guy. Frank Nazar is that guy who will get into the board battles and get stuff quickly. Oliver Moore, who's coming, is that guy. Ryan Green in college seems like that guy. Someone like Roman Kanserov is that guy in the KHL. A lot of prospects are people who get into that board. So I'm not saying that Bedard doesn't need to add a 200-foot game, but I'm saying with the way we're drafting on speed and we're drafting on that 200-foot game. And if you have every other forward on your team, basically, being more that 200-foot game kind of person, the only other person in the prospect pool, I would say, who isn't more of a like two-way guy always, is someone like Nick Lardis, who I'll talk about later, who is absolutely a special case. So I definitely think it's a little bit all right. I would still try to instill in Bedard that, hey, you need to be a 200-foot player. You can't just give up on there. But let's be honest, Patrick Kane was that guy. Patrick Kane was the guy who would kind of give up on back checks and not try as hard on the defensive zone. And Patrick Kane's still like the best player in Blackhawks history. Like, at least offensively. Like, it's...
I could see what he was saying, and I do agree with you. Like you said, like it's important to say, like, all right, dude, like if you're given zero effort, like then yeah, you need to have consequences for that. But like you said, Patrick Kane, yeah, he played defense, but I wouldn't expect him to play awesome defense. That wasn't what he was on the team for.
Yeah,
that's not what Bedard's on the team for. He's not there to play defense. So, yeah, he's not going to always give 100% on his defense, but you know what? You won't be yelling at him when he scores 3 goals and gives your team a win because of himself.
And even then, he still has good forechecking ability. I'm thinking of, it's a last year goal, admittedly, but think of the Florida goal last year. You remember when it was Kevin Stenlund on the side and he stripped the puck from him on the forecheck and then shot it top corner against, I think it was Bobrovsky in that game. Or no, I think it was Stolarz now that I remember. But still, either way, that's a forecheck. And yes, that was his rookie year, and you can say, oh, well, he's regressing. I don't think he's regressing. I think he's finding that offensive game because everybody is harping on him for not being offensively enough, even though he's just under a point per game on one of the worst offensive teams in the entire league with barely any help around him, or help that's really young themselves. I think you give him some time, he's finding his offensive game. I don't think while you're trying to find your superstar, while you're trying to let him completely find his offensive game at the next level, you should be like, okay, well, now you need to sit because your defense isn't good enough. I get it. You can have consequences, and you can have him work harder on his defense and back check, but sitting him and making his development slower is going to help nobody.
Well, I also think we may have mentioned this in the last episode, but it also comes with the expectation of where you're drafted, right? And I think we heard a lot of this with Macklin Celebrini, too, and there's a lot of comparisons with him and Bedard. There are so many people that put so many high expectations on first overall draft picks that most times it's unrealistic, no matter what sport you're playing. The amount of expectation that Connor Bedard had as the number 1 pick for the Blackhawks, I think was ridiculous, if you want my honest opinion. There was no way that he was going to live up to the hype that people wanted him to.
I think he has.
It was like for some people that it was going to be instant playoff contenders for some people that I've heard. Not saying everybody said that, but...
Well, people would look at, let's say, the 2007 Pittsburgh Penguins and Crosby's first year in 2006 and how he put up 100 points in his first year. Yes, I get it. Sidney Crosby is a top 5 player all time. All right? Let's cool your jets a little bit. I get it. He's not putting up the generational talent numbers you would expect a little bit, but he's still putting up at a point per game as a teenager. He's still breaking records within the Hawks organization. He's not perfect. Maybe he's not Crosby, and maybe he's not McDavid, but I'm okay with that because Crosby and McDavid are both top 10 players all time.
And you don't find those players very often.
You never find those players. If you want my honest opinion, I don't think Celebrini is that either. I love how good Celebrini has done this year. It's great for the league, but everybody has just been saying how good Celebrini is and how Bedard has been a disappointment, despite the fact that they have been incredibly similar all year. I get it. Celebrini's 1 year younger. He's 1 draft later. But give both of them some time. They're both going to be number 1 centers and fantastic in this league. You got to wait until they're not 19 anymore. All right? And stop comparing people only on point production. It's just not smart. But whatever. It's just a lot of people complaining, and I'm getting tired of it. But I shouldn't, because complaining's fun. I understand. We'll move on to our next segment, talking about what we think Katie's next move are going to be for the team. I personally, again, I've been a big fan of Kyle Davidson his entire tenure here. I know some people have very much not been. I would like to politely disagree, but, everybody has their opinions. When I think about what is next for the Hawks, I think next year is going to be the step that we thought this year is going to be. And it doesn't mean that I think we're going to be a playoff contender next year. But I do think that next year is going to be a year that we step out of the basement, because I think we're going to sign a top free agent this year. I think even if Marner and Rantanen escape us and we can't get one of those top guys, I think we're going to go for someone like Nikolai Ehlers. I think we're going to go for someone who can solidly improve our top 6. And so you're going to have another piece to add on with Teuvo and Bertuzzi, who both of those were the 2 big signings this year. They're this past offseason, and I think both of those have been pretty good. Some of the defensive ones haven't been very good, TJ Brody, but it happens. Not every signing is going to be perfect. I think the big ones, the Teuvo Teravainen one and the Tyler Bertuzzi one, are both pretty darn good. And remember, with how much the cap's going to go up, I haven't even brought up that. The cap is expected to go up millions over the next couple of years. So your next contracts are going to be way higher. Having Tyler Bertuzzi at $5.5 million, for actually $5.4 million for the next 3 years after this one, that's pretty good value now with the cap going up. So I like both of those moves still. I think next year is going to be the big one. We're going to sign that big free agent. And then we talked about it last week on the pod. How many college prospects are going to come up at the end of this year? Oliver Moore, Sam Renzel likely is going to come up. Both of those likely. Ryan Green for sure if he signs with the Hawks, which I would be shocked if he didn't, but anything's possible. But Ryan Green probably going to be added there. Aiden Thompson, if he turns out to be an NHLer, he's signing this offseason. I mean, Slaggert's going to be more full-time. Colton Dock might become a full-time NHLer by next year. Frank Nazar is definitely going to be a full-time NHLer if he's not already. The young defense gets another year under their belt, and you're probably going to buy out Brody, and you're not going to have Martinez anymore, so there's going to be a lot more open spaces for those young D. I think next year is going to really be where you jump, not into the playoffs, but I think of St. Louis this year. Like, they're not in the playoffs, but look at the Winter Classic. Look, did you watch this game? Because they weren't very good against the Blues in that game if you watched. But I think they can take that another step. And even then, there's been a little bit of a step this year. People don't want to admit it because we're still in the basement, but we're 6 points above where we were last year at this exact time. That's not a ton, but that's 3 more wins. So that's not nothing. And that is looked at as, it's a small step, but that's a step. And that is important to have those small steps in your development as a team and get a little bit better bit by bit. Because if you continue to get better, soon enough, all your prospects are up and now you're a really good team. Look at the Devils. They were a bottom feeder and they just kept trying to rebuild, getting more pieces. Nothing worked. And then 1 year, just out of the blue, playoff contenders. I don't think that's what the Hawks are going to become. But I do think they're going to have that jump into outside of a playoff spot next year. I think they can do it, especially with someone like Oliver Moore getting full-time reps, Ryan Green, especially if Sam Renzel comes up. You have a lot of people that are going to be more NHL-level talent that's coming in next year. But that's what I would say KD's next moves are. You have anything else to add about that,
Well,
Mike?
I think when you're talking about development and how you said with the Devils all of a sudden becoming a playoff team, I think people also have to remember that not everyone develops at the same rate.
Yes.
Yeah, the Blackhawks have all these top-level prospects in their systems. That does not mean that they all are going to develop at the same exact rate and come up at the same exact time.
I'm going to pause you on that because that is a fantastic thought, but I have a huge section on that exact topic in our prospect thing. So we'll get to that in just a second, but I could not agree more. People develop at different times, absolutely. We'll just get to that a little bit later. Moving on, just about a month away is the NHL trade deadline. So looking at the Hawks, you already traded Taylor Hall. When you look at their roster, what are some other teams that, or not other teams, what are some other players that you could see getting traded from the Hawks?
Well, that's a tough question because who do I want to get traded or who do I think will get traded? If you wanted to ask me who I want to get traded, it's Seth Jones because no offense to Seth Jones, but I hate the guy.
That's a little far for I would say, but hey, everyone can have their opinion. I
think it's kind of tough from a outsider's perspective, and especially if you're someone who, obviously, we follow the Hawks really closely, but if you're looking at from the point of view of someone who doesn't follow the Hawks, I think it's probably kind of hard because you're not a good team. So you obviously don't have a lot of good pieces to give away.
You are not a good team, no,
right?
We're not.
And usually the trade deadline, the good teams are looking for those veteran players to add that experience and that production. Well, I don't really think the Blackhawks have a lot of those people.
No, they don't.
And they may have some of those older veterans, but they may not be producing. And like you mentioned earlier, a Tyler Bertuzzi? But do you really want to give him away when he's producing with Bedard because you're trying to help Bedard.
Yeah,
so
I personally don't really want to give up Tyler Bertuzzi. I don't know if I talked about this on the last pod, but if you're going to get something back from Bertuzzi, it's got to have to be a big haul. Like someone that, if you're going to trade Tavo or Bertuzzi, they got to give you like a first round pick. And if I'm being honest, I don't really know if those players are worth a first round pick at this point in their careers. So it would have to be an overpayment from a team. And I would understand that. But I think those two players you want to keep on your team. The one that I think is definitely trade bait that I don't necessarily want to be trade bait, but I think is Ryan Donato. I really like him on this team. I think he's perfect in our bottom six, and I think he's found a fit with the Hawks. But I think other teams are going to be aggressive on trying to add him.
They're going to want, yeah.
But it depends on how much they want him. Because if what I've seen from trade rumors is correct, which is like a third-round pick, I'm not trading Ryan Donato for a third-round pick. If I'm honest, I don't know if I'm trading Ryan Donato for a second-round pick this year. If I'm saying I could re-sign Ryan Donato, because I know he's talked about in something like Every Shift, but he's talked about how he wants to stay in the same place because he's bounced around the NHL for basically his whole career, and he wants to stay in one place. I would be available to have the Hawks be that place if that's what he wants, but I want to keep him. I don't want to give him away for just a second. Maybe if there's like a second and a third, and then it's Ryan Donato and like maybe a lower tier piece, I would be willing to give it. Like maybe if someone like it's a Ryan Donato and Pat Maroon for a second and third, I think that's an overpayment. But I think if you're the Hawks and you're giving up a piece that you want to keep, it's going to have to be an overpayment or you're not going to give it away. You also got to wait and see what kind of market it is, because think of last year. It was a buyer's market by a lot last year. You could get a really good player for just a second round pick. This year so far, we'll talk about the trades in a minute, but it seems like it's a little bit more of a seller's market. I don't know if it's a full seller's market this year, but it's definitely more than it was last year. So we'll have to see what the market is closer to the deadline. But if you're trading Ryan Donato, I want it to be more than a third round pick.
You bring up the word overpayment, and it just makes me go and think of, I think you probably see it more in free agency, but you know, for teams that are serious about making a cup run, it's not out of the question. Like, they do overpay. Those teams that make those cup runs, they do overpay on trades.
Oh, they do.
I definitely think you see it more in free agency, but I think you are exactly right. If you are going to trade one of those players, I think you try and target them to a cup contender, because I think those are the teams that are definitely going to, if you're going to have an overpayment, it's going to come from one of those teams.
Think of, what was it? Think of the Tampa Bay Lightning when they won their cup. They paid a first-round pick for Barclay Goodrow. And I remember everyone that year was clowning them for that move. Everyone was, what? A first for Barclay Goodrow? That's ridiculous. And then they won the cup that year. And you know who cared then? Nobody. Because they won the cup. So it depends on the cup contender, but I think you only give someone like Ryan Donato away if it's an overpayment. And then other guys on the team that are possible trade pieces is honestly hard to say. Personally, I like Jason Dickinson on the Hawks. He was a lot better last year. He's kind of struggled a lot more this year. Only 7 goals, 9 assists in 52 games for 16 points. But he is very good defensively, and he was a Selke candidate in the first half of this year. He's kind of fallen off a little bit more on the second half, but I do still really like Jason Dickinson, so I don't know if they're going to trade him. I think more of those one-year rentals you're going to see get traded. I think someone like Alec Martinez has a solid chance. If someone wants Pat Maroon, I think that's a solid chance. I think if there's a goalie-needy team, I don't think they want Peter Mrazek, and I don't think you really give away Arvid Soderblom, but it's kind of just what people call you. People are going to call you. People are going to ask for stuff, and you're going to have to unload what you can and what people want.
What do you think is going to happen when Brossoit comes back? That brings up an interesting question, because I think we mentioned it maybe on the podcast, or maybe we just talked about it off the podcast, but Brossoit is going to be available possibly this year, which means Davidson's going to have to handle a 3-goalie rotation.
I think at this point in the year, you take someone you have that is eligible for waivers and you just send one of the forwards down and you run a 3-goalie system. I think that's a lot, but I think the 3 goalies is the best you can do because I don't want to put Mrazek or I definitely don't want to put Arvid Soderblom on waivers because he's no longer eligible for waivers because he's been fantastic for us. I really like Soderblom, especially we were talking about that Tampa win 4-1. He was amazing in that game. So it definitely comes down to maybe if you have one that's not performing as well, maybe like Peter Mrazek, he's been a little bit worse this year. You consider putting him on waivers, but I don't even know. I've liked Mrazek. I wouldn't put him on waivers. At this point, I would just run a 3-goalie system, and then next year figure out what you have, and maybe try and if Peter Mrazek's the odd man out, then you trade him. If Laurent Brossoit, even though you just signed him this past year, didn't get any playing time and he wants to go to somewhere else, then you trade Laurent Brossoit. I think it's whatever becomes available, and I think you also have to see. I do hope Brossoit comes back before the end of the year, personally. And I think we will run that 3-goalie system, and because I want to see Brossoit on this team. I want to see how he does in that, because we haven't even seen him once. He's been injured all year.
Yeah.
The last person I'll mention as a possible more dark horse candidate to get traded is Ilya Mikheyev. He's played almost every game for the Hawks, 50 games out of the 52 available. He's got 15 points, which is not a lot, but he has been very good on the penalty kill. He's incredibly fast. I think if you, as the Hawks, consider retaining some salary and somebody needs that penalty-killing guy on their bottom 6, I think you can consider Ilya Mikheyev. He's been pretty good. Even if his stats don't project as well as only 15 points in 50 games, I still think he's been good enough that a team might want him. But it kind of just comes down to who wants what at the trade deadline. And obviously, we are not in the minds of general managers. We can only react to trades that have already happened, which is a great segue into talking about the trades that have already happened in the NHL, is because there have been 4 big ones already. We are really going over on time a little bit, about an hour too, so we're going to have to hurry up a little bit already, but that's all right. So some trades around the NHL so far. So starting early in the week, we got a big trade between the Calgary Flames and the Philadelphia Flyers. Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee to Calgary in exchange for Andrei Kuzmenko and Jacob Peltier, and I think a second round and conditional 4th round pick were the last parts of that trade. So I don't know if you know much about any of those players, but I know a little bit. I think, honestly, again, a lot of people like to instantly give a winner when a trade happens, and I don't think that's smart a lot of the time, because a lot of the time it takes longer to figure out who's going to be the winner. So far, it's up in the air. I mean, Joel Farabee has not scored yet for the Flames, but I am personally a fan of Joel Farabee. I mean, he came into the league in 2019-20 for 52 games and had 21 points as a rookie. Then he had 38 and 55 his next year and was kind of that like 30-point guy. I mean, he had 39 and 82, 34 and 63, so around that similar area, about a half a point a game guy. And then in 23-24, so last year, he had 50 points in 82 games, 22 goals as well. So he seemed to be on the up and up. He was only 23. 24 this year, only has 19 points in 50 games, and then just got traded to the Flames where he has 0 points so far. I think it's hard to say, because Farabee, you want to talk about people who aren't as good on the back check? That's Joel Farabee, I'd say. So it's hard to really say who's going to win this trade so far, but I am more of a fan of Joel Farabee than I am of anyone else in this trade than Kuzmenko, Peltier, or Frost. So I would probably say the Flames got the higher end, but it's also, you just have to wait and see. Andrei Kuzmenko, let me see if he's scored at all yet in his debut for the Flyers. No, he's not played a game yet for the Flyers. So it's kind of up in the air. Again, trades are hard to analyze before they get further down, but that was a big one. And it was just the start of the flurry of trades. We then went for probably the biggest one so far, which was JT Miller for Philip Hedl, essentially. I mean, there was some smaller pieces in there. There was a first-round pick as well, but the JT Miller trade was big. Everybody knew it was coming. I mean, the beef between JT Miller and Elias Pettersson was not... It wasn't low. Everybody knew that there was a problem between the two of those two. So it was kind of just like a matter of time at that point when the trade was going to happen. And you had heard rumblings that he wanted to go back to the Rangers. There had been a trade in place maybe. Finally went through on Friday night as JT Miller went to the Rangers in exchange for Philip Hedl, defenseman Victor Mancini, and a 2025 first-round pick. Defenseman Eric Brandstrom and Jackson Dornton were also part of the package to New York, but those are kind of more bottom pair guys. I think Brandstrom and Victor Mancini are kind of in a similar boat. They're younger defensemen. Mancini, it's his first year. He's kind of been a little rough as a rookie. You'll see what happens. Defenseman Eric Brandstrom has been okay. This is his third team already this year, so it kind of he's kind of just a throw-in piece at this point. So the main ones back are Philip Hedl and a first-round pick for JT Miller. And everyone dubbed the Rangers the winner off the bat. But personally, I think Philip Hedl's, he's younger. You get I don't think JT Miller is really a locker room cancer, but there was clearly an issue there. So you get the issue out, and you bring in Philip Hedl, a young center who can play center now. Elias Pettersson can now be your franchise number one center, and you can view him as such. And you don't have that, again, another center that's going to be fighting for that number one center role. And then you get that first round pick as well. So I thought it was a pretty good trade for both sides. JT Miller scored twice in his Rangers debut, but they still lost. So I think it's a good trade for both sides, honestly. And Philip Hedl actually scored last night for the Canucks, so he seems to be fitting in there pretty well. But that was not the end of the trades on the weekend, as that first-round pick that we just talked about, the Vancouver Canucks flipped that first-round pick to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Marcus Pettersson. And that one, I understand a little bit less. I do like the Penguins, as you can see. Got a Penguins jersey right there in the back of our set here. But I didn't like that trade as much. As someone who watches the Penguins occasionally, Marcus Pettersson's good. He's been playing a top pairing role this year. I don't know. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of Marcus Pettersson. However, I do think he definitely fits in a top four role. And when you have a team like the Canucks that needs defense beyond just Quinn Hughes and their Philip Hronek on that top pair, I think getting someone like Marcus Pettersson to play on that second pair is a really good idea. So the full trade there was Marcus Pettersson and forward Drew O'Connor from the Penguins in exchange for the first round pick, Danton Heinen, and Vincent Desjardins. Danton Heinen for Drew O'Connor is Drew O'Connor, very much someone who struggles in finishing but is really good at forechecking. Was playing in a top six role for the Penguins because they needed him to, and wasn't really doing well because of that lack of finishing ability. So I think in the bottom six for the Canucks, that'll be good. And then Danton Heinen, I actually think is the perfect fit for the Penguins because he's someone that isn't necessarily like Landon Slaggert where he can play all throughout the lineup, but he's someone that can play anywhere in the lineup and be more that facilitator kind of guy. And I think that's something that the Penguins needed in their top six comparatively to Drew O'Connor. So honestly, I think that trade's another win-win. A lot of these trades I've actually liked for both sides, despite most people online being most people and just saying that, oh man, the Rangers won this one, or yada yada, whatever.
I never understand why people do that. I mean, I get it. We're fans and we like to react, but like you said, why are we overreacting in the first hour of it being a trade when we haven't even seen them play a game for us. Like,
yeah.
Just calm your horses a little bit, because
smooth your roll just a little bit.
There could be a massive trade, right? And you're like getting a superstar, and then they come to your team and they just do absolutely nothing. Now, the chances of you getting a superstar and they do nothing, I know it's low, but still,
low, yeah.
The idea that you overreact within the first hour is, crazy.
I've already heard some people, and that's not a lot, but I've already seen some people be like, oh man, the Canes lost on the Mikko Rantanen trade because he only has 2 points in 4 games. I'm like,
it's 4 games.
It's people. 4 games, dude. Like, give it more time. Like, just slow your roll a little bit. I swear it'll be okay. Like,
if people want to react, if you want to react that way or react in the first hour, first of all, don't talk to me about it.
I don't want to hear about it.
And second of all, if you think you're that good at evaluating players, then go be the GM yourself.
I went on a little bit of a tangent here while looking up, because I had thought about, you remember the Kakko trade earlier this year? Got traded to Seattle. He had 14 points in 30 games with the Rangers this year when he got traded. He already has 16 points in 21 games with the Kraken. So good news for Kakko, number 2 overall pick in 2019. He seems to be thriving a little bit more with a team that actually cares about his development. Oh, who said that? Wow, crazy. Anyway, we'll get to the last trade of the NHL so far this past week. That was on Saturday. That was Mikael Granlund and Cody Ceci were traded to the Dallas Stars from the San Jose Sharks on Saturday. Granlund was the Sharks' #1 point scorer this year so far. And yes, that does include Macklin Celebrini on that team. So just throwing that out there. Anyway, in return for that, they got a first-round pick and a conditional third that's likely going to be a fourth, because it only becomes a third if Dallas makes the finals. And I don't know if they're going to do that this year. But if they do, it's a third-round pick, but essentially a first-round pick. I think this is a pretty good trade for both sides. Again, the Dallas Stars just had to put Tyler Seguin on IR, and he's probably not going to come back until late in the playoffs.
That's a big hit.
If he's going to come back, yeah. So getting someone who's like good in a similar center role in Mikael Granlund is probably really smart. And they also just had to put Nils Lundkvist on. He just had season-ending shoulder surgery. So Cody Ceci, just a depth defenseman to help replace that. I think both of those are pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of Cody Ceci. Yes, I was basically not a fan of the entirety of the Oilers' blue line during their cup run this past year, other than Evan Bouchard and Matthias Ekholm. But Cody Ceci, I just don't love him when he's in a top 4 role. I think you put him in a bottom 6 role or a bottom pair role, and I think he's pretty good. I think he's all right if you put him in that more bottom pair role. I just think when you give him a lot of minutes, he makes more mistakes. But I think, honestly, pretty good trade by the Stars just to get both of their needs met. And then San Jose, you're rebuilding still. It's a first-round pick. First-round picks are always nice. So
Do you see the Sharks rebuilding? How similar, I should say, do you think the Sharks are going to be rebuilding in the way that the Blackhawks are rebuilding?
I think they're a little bit further behind in their rebuild. I don't think they're super far, because they still have really good talent. They still have William Eklund, obviously Macklin Celebrini. They have Will Smith now from the 2023 draft. They have Sam Dickinson from this past draft as well, and he's looking really good in the OHL. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a number 1, but I think if you're the Sharks, you're staring at Matthew Schaefer right now. Like, if you get the number 1 overall pick, I think the Sharks eagerly jump up to the podium and grab Matthew Schaefer, because having a left side of Matthew Schaefer and Sam Dickinson, along with a right side of somebody like Shakir Makamudulin, someone like that, maybe more defense in the future, but I think the Sharks would definitely be someone who's in on Matthew Schaefer over the other top picks this coming year. But that's where I see their rebuild in, and honestly, that's about it for the trades right now in hockey. Any last things to cover before we do a quick prospect talk before we wrap it up?
No, I think you hit it right on the head. I think, mainly we're gonna just have to see how these trades pan out. I'm not an overreactor, as I've stated. I think it's quite stupid, but we'll have to just wait and see. But yeah, speaking of prospects, Dylan, I call you the prospect guru for obvious reasons, but tell us about some of the Hawks prospects.
All right, so I have 3 different sections I'll do. I'm going to make this quick again because we are already over our time, but that is all right. I'll go quickly. First, Lev Shinov had a goal this past weekend in a loss. It was an unfortunate loss against, I'm pretty sure it was the Wolves, but he did have a goal, and you know who was the assist man on it? Dmitry Kuzmin.
Yes, sir.
Man, am I feeling just a absolute abundance of catharsis from last week because I said, hey, I know Isaac Phillips is like the better prospect, but Kuzmin is that brother, that like friend of Lev Shinov. And sure enough, Lev Shinov scores a goal it was I think the second game Kuzmin was in the lineup. And it was assisted by Kuzmin. And if you watched our Tartem Lev Shinov's reaction, you know he was that happy because he was assisted by his fellow countrymen. He was jumping. He literally jump tackled Kuzmin after the goal. It was pretty funny to see. But not to mention, Lev Shinov has a goal and an assist since Kuzmin's been in the lineup. So 3 games he's been in the lineup, he already has 2 points, while he was, I think, 13 points in 35 games before that. So
coincidence?
It could be, but all I'm saying is furthering the development of your number 2 overall prospect is a pretty good idea, and I definitely have a little bit of a I told you so on that, but whatever. Overall, both Korchinski and Lev Shinov are in the AHL right now, and I've seen a lot of people frowning on the 2 of them because Korchinski has, I think, 16 points in 30-something games, and Artem Lev Shinov has 13 in about a similar amount of games. But Kevin Korchinski was an AHL All-Star this year, all right? Pure point production is not the only thing you can look at. And I know a lot of people like just looking at points and saying, well, Korchinski's like half a point a game right now in the AHL. You look at Denton Matejchuk, and he was like a point per game, and he's the same draft. It's like, just relax. Points are not everything. I think they're learning what they need to in Rockford right now. Again, they're taking like the main 2 defensemen in Rockford. I mean, again, Korchinski was an all-star, and Lev Shinov has the most time on ice from a lot of the players in the AHL. So I think they're doing well in their development. And for people who are saying this is ridiculous, like they should be ready, like we need our defensemen, I always have to bring up Gustav Forsling. Gustav Forsling, Cup champion, one of the best defensemen on the team that just won the Cup in the Florida Panthers. Did you know he was a Hawks prospect for a long time? I mean, I know a lot of Hawks fans don't like me saying this, but he was a Hawks prospect for a long time, and I'm not going to pretend like I was any different. I didn't think Gustav Forsling was going to be anything. So when we traded him for Calvin DeHaan, I thought it was a good move, honestly. I didn't think Gustav Forsling was going to be anything. And then he went to a situation where they actually were patient with his development, and turns out, oh man, he's one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire NHL right now. And you know who could have really used a really good defensive defenseman? The Blackhawks. But it happens. But Gustav is a perfect example of when you need to be patient with your prospects, especially defensemen. They're not perfect right now. I know they're not. But give them time. They're both... No, not both. Korchinski's super light right now. He still needs to put on more weight. Lev Shinov is a fire hydrant, so he doesn't have to deal with that as much, but he's more dealing with the mental aspect of the pros. They're both developing. Let them have their time in Rockford.
Well, what did we say earlier? Not everyone develops at the same time.
Exactly.
And
that's what I'm saying.
They got to find the right fit, too.
Exactly. So I think you just got to be patient with someone like Lev Shinov and Korchinski, because personally, I think they're both going to be great top 4 defensemen, and they're going to slot in with Sam Renzel and Alex Vlasic and make a really good top 4 for the Blackhawks in the future. I think we just have to be patient. That's all for the AHL prospects. We'll move on to the NCAA. As the only prospect I really want to talk about in the NCAA right now. There's a lot, but I talked about a good amount of them last week, in Sam Renzel and Oliver Moore, and even a Sasha Boisvert, who's been leading North Dakota in points as a freshman. That's insane. But moving on. We'll move to Ryan Green, who I talked about a little bit earlier, as Case McCarthy has played with him at BU, but Ryan Green has been really, really good for Boston U this year. He's one of their leading point scorers, if they're not their top point scorer. He had 2 really good primary assists this past weekend in their first of their 2 games, up to 26 points in 24 games on the year, 11 goals, 15 assists, and again, he's doing much better than he was last year. He has about 16 games less than he played last year and only about 10 less points. So Ryan Green has been fantastic this year so far for Boston. I'm excited to see what they could do in the Frozen Four. And Ryan Green is just that guy that I think gets forgotten about a lot. Because especially when you talk about the NCAA prospects, it's Renzel, it's Moore, it's like the first round pick Sasha Boisvert that's killing it for North Dakota right now. It's even someone like Aiden Thompson at Denver. It's a top program, and he's putting up top 10 in the entire NCAA in point production. Like, you have a lot of guys you would talk about in the NCAA right now with the Hawks. Ryan Green kind of gets like slid under the rug a little bit, and I don't think he should. He's a captain for Boston University. And I think at a over point per game production for a captain at Boston U,
there's a lot of people that would want that position.
Exactly. That's a bit. I mean, there's so many people that wanted that position. There's co-captains. There's him and Shane LaChance as co-captains of that team. So I think you got to give Ryan Green his flowers, and I'm really excited to see what he can do if he goes to the Hawks at the end of this year, which I do really think he's going to. But that's the only real prospect I wanted to talk about at the NCAA level. Moving on to the final prospect I'll talk about before we wrap up our podcast, and that's going to be Nick Lardis. And do I have a lot to talk about for Nick Lardis. Oh, man. First of all, I get another big I told you so when it comes to Nick Lardis. I haven't said it on the podcast, but I was talking about Nick Lardis since he was drafted, because Nick Lardis was number 1 in a lot of, combine categories when he was drafted, and I thought when you had that good of a combine and you had that good of a second half of his rookie or his draft year where he put up 25 points and 25 goals in 30 something games, like I thought, oh man, this guy, nobody can look past this, and he fell to the 3rd round. And I was honestly kind of surprised, but I was like, oh, well, there's some holes in his game, yada yada. This year, Nick Lardis for the Brantford Bulldogs, which by the way, Merrick Vanaker, another Blackhawks prospect, also on the Brantford Bulldogs. So there's 2 Hawks prospects there, but 81 points in 47 games this year. 48 goals in 47 games. Yes, you heard that correctly. 48 goals in 47 games. He has been ridiculous. He had a 4-goal night yesterday.
That's insane.
4 goals, 1 assist. Not night, sorry, it was the afternoon, but still. Utterly ridiculous. Nick Lardis' shot is pro-ready already. He is fantastic sniper right now. But that's not the other thing that's big about Nick Lardis. The other thing that's really nice about Nick Lardis is he's speed. You watched him in the prospect development camp a year and a half ago, and he beat Pavel Buchnevich to the puck. I'm going to give a shout out to the Rinkside General, a good Hawks thing. If you want to find on YouTube more prospect stuff, I definitely recommend him. But he had a great video just yesterday about Nick Lardis, and he's fast. He's going to play into that role that the Hawks want to build, as they've been building a lot of fast players. Nick Lardis fits into that perfectly. And especially on imagining a second line of someone like Oliver Moore, who's that center and more of a forechecker, with Nick Lardis, who's the trigger man, with someone like Frank Nazar, who is the setup man. I think those 3 personally, I really hope those 3 get put on a line together in the NHL, because I think they would work together perfectly. They all complement each other very well. But we'll have to see. But right now, again, 48 goals in 47 games, and he can score in a variety of different areas as well. He can score from far away. His one-timer is lethal. His one-timer is ridiculous. And there's a really fun stat I want to bring up for Nick Lardis. Right now, if he continues on his current pace, which is a big if, he would be at 67 goals on the year. Even if he doesn't hit that, if he can get 12 goals in his next about 20 games, which is very possible since he's been scoring at over a goal a game pace, if he can score 12 in his next 19 games, he will be the first player in the OHL to score 60 goals for a couple years. Since 2015, there have only been 2 players in the OHL who have scored 60 goals. One of them is Justin Brazeau, who isn't as flashy, but he's also 6'7", so when you're in a junior league, being 6'7" is probably a little bit helpful. But not only that, but he was also 20 and then 21 for that year that he scored 60 goals in the OHL. He was 20 and then turned 21 halfway through the year. So he was a little bit of an older guy. Nick Lourdes is in his draft plus 2 year, but he was one of the youngest players in his draft. So he's going to be 19 until July. So the entirety of the OHL season, he will be 19. And the only other player to score 60 goals was also 19. And you know who that player was?
Get ready, Hawks fans. You know.
Alex DeBrincat. Only other player in the OHL to score 60 under the age of 20 in the past 10 years. So since the Hawks have won their cup, so you know just how long that is. Since the Hawks last won their cup, only 2 players have, and only one has done it under the age of 20, and that was Alex DeBrincat. And it could very well be number 2 is Nick Lourdes. So am I saying that Nick Lourdes is going to be Alex DeBrincat? No. That is a lot of pressure to put on a young player.
That'd be nice.
I mean, do I think he's going to be Alex DeBrincat and join the NHL in his first year and put up 40 goals? No. No. I do not think that at all. But I do think that Nick Lourdes is going to be a perfect fit for what the Hawks are trying to become. And I think he could make a great goal-scoring winger on that second line, maybe. Like, I think he could absolutely put up 30 goals. 30 goals, 50 points, something like that on your second line. That's pretty good production, I'd say. So having Nick Lourdes, I think, is a big prospect in the system, someone you want to look out for, because he's someone that he does have problems. I'm not going to say he doesn't. He gets away with a lot of easier goals because he's in juniors. I mean, tearing up juniors doesn't necessarily mean you're going to tear up the pros. But the way that he can score in any way is going to translate. His shot is going to translate. He's going to have some struggles, mainly off. He excels in off-the-puck vision, but sometimes he doesn't have that stick handling ability and deception ability with the puck that someone like Alex DeBrincat could, where he could dangle around people or something like that. I don't think Nick Lourdes is going to do that. But he also has people like Frank Nazar around him who have more of that kind of skill. I feel like you just put him on that second line as more of a trigger man, and I think he's going to be really good. And he can still dish it, too. It's not like he can't. It's just that his on-puck awareness isn't as good sometimes as his off-puck. And then a little bit of defensive liability. Not a huge deal. He's definitely better than someone like Patrick Kane was coming out of the OHL. But he does have a little bit of defensive lapses, and his biggest thing is his strength. And he himself has admitted that he needs to get stronger to be in the pros, because he's only 5'11", and he's not huge. But, by the way, 5'11" is about 4 inches taller than Alex DeBrincat. So it's not like he's the smallest player and having to overcome major obstacles to be able to make the league. He has it a little bit easier than someone like Alex DeBrincat does.
Short people can do it too.
Oh, I know. Clearly, Cole Caulfield and Alex DeBrincat have proved everyone wrong in that aspect. I'm just saying that's not something to damper with him. He's not like, oh, he's only so tall, that's how he's scoring this much. No, he's pretty average size, I'd say, 5'11". So I'm really, really excited for Nick Lourdes. I'm excited to see what he can do in the AHL next year. I think that's going to be a big meter to test how good he's going to be in the future. Because if he rips up the AHL in scoring, he's going to be a top sixer for sure, I'd say. If he struggles in the AHL a little bit and really struggles to translate his game, maybe he's more of a toss-up. I don't know if he's going to be a top 6 guy. And honestly, Nick Lourdes is someone that I don't really see being a good bottom 6 guy. Maybe he could become a Tyler Kennedy. Tyler Kennedy, former Penguin, was during their in between their cups in 2009 and 2016, so he played around like 13, 12, those years. And he was just a guy who shoot. That's kind of how Lourdes is. He doesn't pass the puck a lot. That's why, he scores so many goals because, clearly he can pass the puck. He has 33 assists this year, but his ability is with the shot. A lot of his assists, not all of them, but a lot of his assists he gets just by firing at the net and then someone picks up the rebound and scores. So he's someone that lives and breathes on his shot, but his shot is good enough to be able to do that. The question is, will that shot translate as well to the NHL? And I think it will, along with his speed, but it's one of those things that you just got to see.
All right, well, I guess we will see here in a couple of years how good the Hawks get. But for now, that will wrap up the episode number 2 of the Sin Bin podcast.
A little bit long today, so sorry about that one a little bit. An hour 30 we're at right now, so sorry for your time there. We will try to keep it closer to an hour normally, but just a couple big weeks ahead for both the Bison and the Hawks, so a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up here, I just want to shout out the Bison Facebook fan page. If you haven't checked them out, go check them out on Facebook. Great group of people. You can get a lot of information, Bison games, tickets, watch parties, all that kind of thing. So make sure you go check them out. And if you missed our first episode, go ahead and go back and listen to our first episode as well.
It's on YouTube and Spotify.
Yes, YouTube and Spotify.
The first episode does not have the video that this one does on YouTube, but you do still have a still frame on YouTube there, so if you want to listen to that first episode, that'll be up wherever you're listening to this one. But other than that, that should wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening to episode 2 of the Sin Bin podcast, and you will hear us once again next week. Thank you for listening.